Okay, nice to see all of you who are back. This afternoon is rather more interactive, shall we say. So we have a panel first, which is on conflicting, it really follows on from this morning and certainly from Brendan's talk this morning, conflicting narratives, migration, immigration and global citizenship. I will be moderating. I'll warn you now, those of you who've seen me moderate before, I will be asking you to ask questions. If you want to give a lecture, that's something you do somewhere else. This is an interactive session with questions and some views from the panel. I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction, and then I'm going to ask our three panelists to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their background and experience. You've heard a little bit from Brendan, but not in this context. And then I've got a couple of questions up my sleeve for them. And I'd like you to formulate a few for yourselves, if that's okay. And we'll try and get through as many as possible. We only have an hour. I'm going to just look at Matthew in a minute and make sure I keep to time. If that's all right, you can just tell me to shut up whenever, and we'll try and work on it from there. So I'll do a little bit of an introduction, as I say. Do come in, make yourselves comfortable. And I'm just going to start with that, which is really to start with it's actually a quote from Plato, which is those who tell and claim the stories control the world. And the stories we are told and we are told and tell are the flesh on the bones of power. It seems we are living through a time of increasing polarization. The world feels ever more fractured, unsettled, and unsettling, whether due to the narratives of migration and immigration, of conflict, war, or through natural crises that are more or less catastrophizing depending on who is telling that story. In many parts of the globe, nations and communities have been dispossessed and destabilized in both the global north and the global south. Brendan gave us some figures this morning. I'd got down here circa 120 million, so I was bang in the middle of that. Displaced people are on the move, separated from the place they once called home. Opportunities for formal education support have disintegrated, and the opportunities to exercise some agency over their lives and to unlock their full potential are no more. We have a humanitarian crisis and focus our attention on relieving the crisis with no longer a view as to how to tackle that long-term challenge. We are here in the sixth largest economy in the world, with a well-respected and established higher education system that has welcomed and educated students from across the world for over 150 years, and that has been a central pillar of the UK's global influence and soft power. Since the 1980s, international students have made an immeasurable cultural contribution and a growing financial contribution to the UK economy. In 2022, it was 42 billion. More overseas earning than the oil and gas industry. And yet we increasingly conflate two narratives. One of immigrants and refugees, of stopping illegal migration, and that of the enrichment and value that our international students bring to university life, and how we as students and educators learn about what it is to be a global citizen, in theory, but most importantly, in practice, through the meeting of minds and cultures. Students and faculty have been castigated for protests, and we see them outside this building, through the meeting for challenging national investments as the stories are enacted on campus, reinforcing the need to educate for peace, to understand the machinery of power for global and responsible citizenship. Despite growing concerns for destructive and extreme forms of activism that can be socially destructive and self-defeating, a riot is often the language of the unheard, as Martin Luther King noted. It is often that we fail to hear dominant national and political narratives. It is where the space and place, and arguably a key responsibility of higher education, to surface and debate contested alternative narratives, to consider the plight of others, to consider how we all have to continuously work, not only to maintain a status quo and tranquility for those privileged by any dominant narrative, but where we are unable to listen, to hear other voices, to reflect and to act, and improve on the justice, inequity, equity, humanity as a means to maintain an always uneasy but essential peace. In recent weeks, we have seen competing narratives played out within higher education, and that challenge the view of individual nations. The conflicting narratives and tragedies of Ukraine and Russia, of Gaza, have been contested on campuses across the world. Snap elections in Europe and an alarm of a rise of the far right. World politics in 2024 are febrile, as we heard this morning, including here in the UK. In this context, and through the eyes or the lens of IAFOR's international, intercultural and interdisciplinary mission, we are very fortunate this afternoon to have with us 3 panellists who will discuss these challenges, and we hope that you will engage with this too. So that's a little speech from me, just about what is happening. We do have 3 esteemed panellists from actually with very different experiences in terms of their continents. So I'm going to start with you, Brendan, because you already introduced. So introduce yourself a little bit again, and just say a little bit about actually what you do and your kind of interest in this subject. And then I'll come to Liliana because she's done it before, and then I'll come to Donald, if that's okay. So Brendan.
Great. Thanks very much, Anne. Although I am UK citizen, I'm based in Korea and have been for the last 23 years. And most of my work has been focused on East Asia, both Northeast Asia and Southeast Asia. I'm currently the president of the Asian Political and International Studies Association. So I guess I'm here representing Asia on this panel, of the 3 continents represented up here. Most of my work is focused on human insecurity. So it's interdisciplinary in that it encompasses human rights, international organizations, international relations, global governance, national governance, political science, development cooperation, etc., etc., etc. So anything that threatens vulnerable individuals and groups, but also how best we can protect or provide the conditions under which vulnerable individuals and groups can empower themselves. And that's a very important aspect of my work, is looking at empowering the subaltern. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much. Liliana, introduce yourself, because you'll be doing it much better than me.
Thank you so much. My name is Liliana Markovic. I'm a full professor of the European Center for Peace and Development of the United Nations University for Peace. We have our headquarters in Belgrade, Serbia. And I'm also an academic director of ECPD, the European Center for Peace and Development. But what I would like to say is that I'm a professor in Japanese studies and also in economics. And what I teach currently at ECPD is management in education, science, and culture. I have believed very strongly in the importance of education all my life, and I have been through different stages and different paradigms in the education, pedagogy, and didactics. But this morning we heard some excellent thoughts on how actually autonomous learner becomes the real target of our peace-building educational system. Because if you encourage critical thinking in students, and if you give them conditions for high-quality education, which the new technologies, starting with Moodle and now with artificial intelligence, well ruled by us as professors, and not displacing us necessarily, as some people are glad to say, how these technical aids can make this very privileged educational paradigm, privileged in the sense that it used to be available only to few in small teaching groups, now becomes available in mass education, in teaching large classes, but at a very high level. So what we are trying to do at the United Nations University for Peace, at ECPD in Belgrade, is we are trying to offer alternative worldview to the present one. That is the possibility of building peace, training for peace, thinking peace, and ensuring economic development. Because many systems of thought say otherwise. They say that sporadic wars or partial wars are necessary to keep the demand engine in the economies running, but that's just not true. If you work for peace, that investment in peace education gives multiple effects and linkages that bring more and more development, because what kind of development is possible without peace? So that's all for now.
Thank you very much. And over to Donald.
Thank you, and it's lovely to be back to an IAFOR conference. I think this is probably my 20th or something, but I'm Donald Hall. I am currently the Executive Vice President and Provost of Binghamton University, which is in New York State. It's part of the State University of New York system. It's about an 18,000 student campus with faculties of engineering, business, arts and sciences, nursing, healthcare, and social work and education. So it's a very diverse campus. And before that, I was an executive dean of engineering, arts and sciences at the University of Rochester. Before that, a dean of arts and sciences at Lehigh University, which was an engineering sort of centered campus. And I could go back in time, but that's been one part of my life, and a very important part. Another part of my life, though, from the time I was about 18, 19 years old, was as a political activist in the sphere of LGBTQ studies, queer studies, as it was called in the 1990s and beyond. And what I'm struggling with, I will just say, as an administrator who sets university policies, who intervenes at times in difficult situations, whether it's faculty disputes or faculty-student disputes or staff, whatever, is what universities do and can do and what they don't do and what they can't do very well. And I think that's something that we can talk about here today, because as someone who teaches sexuality studies, and I've certainly taught many classes in gay and lesbian literature, I'm a lit professor by background, the people whom we attract to those classes are the ones who are already converted. They're there because they're interested in it. You don't get the homophobes who come to those classes. You similarly, when we teach classes related to peace studies, etc., you don't get warmongers coming to those classes. You get the people who already are there or most of the way there. And so what the approach I take to this is that, yes, we have an important role at the university in generating knowledge and educating students, but equally important is what we remind our students they need to do and be off campus, and that is engaged citizens, voting citizens, knowledgeable citizens, etc. Because my biggest fear at the moment in the United States, as we're facing an election in a few months, is that a lot of very progressive, even radical students will sit at home and allow someone to come into office that may never want to leave office again. And that is a very real fear on our part. So eager to talk about these things.
Thank you very much. And that's a really good segue into certainly my first question. And I encourage you all to form your own questions while we're having this bit of the conversation, and then we'll hand the mic over to you. My first question is one which is based on the fact that in this room, I'm sure there are people undertaking PhDs, people in their mid-career, and very experienced educators. And sometimes when you hear these big kind of global or political discussions, it's a bit like the climate change discussion. What can I do? Where am I, or how do I find any sense of purpose or a form of action? So my question is threefold in that sense. It's what can you do? And Donald's just touched on a little bit of this. As an individual, what can we do in narratives such as this to make a difference? In our professional lives, what can we do to make that difference? And if you were in charge, and some of us are, more than others, what would you change? Those are the three questions. So I've dropped that one on you, Brendan. In terms of the individual, in terms of the kind of professional construct, and in terms of if you really had power, what would you change?
Okay, well, yeah, thanks for the low-hanging fruit. Nice, easy question to start with that. First of all, as individuals, a lot of this discourse takes a universalist perspective that, there are universal human rights, there are universal responsibilities, but that always founders on the individualism or the epistemological divergence or different cultural perspectives of the individual or of the group. So I like to take an overlapping consensus approach to these issues, that rather than focusing on what do we have to do at a global level, at a universal level, from a universal perspective, are there, instead of universal human rights, are there universal human wrongs? From every epistemological perspective, from every individual perspective, are there things that we could all think, well, yeah, that's not right, even if it's just intuitively not right. So at an individual level, I think if we come across things that we think are intuitively not right, they don't feel right, then we have an obligation to say something about it, to step up as much as possible, as is safe. I'm not saying go out there and confront the skinheads or whatever it may be, but do what you can. And politics is the art of the possible. So do what you can within the bounds of keeping yourself safe. What you should not do is say, well, this is a universal problem, so I can't do anything. We shouldn't be discouraged by that. Professionally, I think professionally we need to lobby within our disciplines, whatever your discipline may be, lobby for a bottom-up perspective, starting with the recipients of the education system in whatever discipline that may be. So consult regularly with the students. I'm currently a dean of a fairly large graduate school, but I make it a point of reaching out to all of the students and all of the faculty, and indeed having regular conversations with our administrative staff. That leadership really comes from the bottom up, not the top down. So professionally, I think that's what we need to do within our disciplines, encourage a human centering in all our disciplines. And my discipline is international relations, which is often seen as the bombs and guns discipline. The strong do what they want, the weak suffer what they must. That's a cop-out. I think we need to explore avenues within our professional practice and our professional understanding, our research, to find out what we can do. What would I change if I was in charge? And I'm taking this to mean at a much higher political level. I would hope to extend this to the practices of governance, whether it be national governance or global governance. That exploring these ideas of overlapping consensus, listening to as many different voices as possible, and building from the bottom up. So maybe you have to go through the local, then through the regional, then through the national, then further interregional, up to the global. But that's what we need to do, I think. Human centering, overlapping consensus of the universal wrongs, and empowering the most vulnerable, the most disenfranchised, for their voices to be heard.
Brilliant. That's a great start. Thank you. Liliana, I'm sure I can't stop you responding to that. So
Thank you.
take it away.
Well, it is a very complex question, and we could discuss it for a long time. But let me say that at the University for Peace, established by the United Nations, and especially at ECPD, its European Center for Peace and Development, we are trying to do our best to give high-quality education in the previously mentioned sense of development of each student, of this paradigm which puts the student in the center of the learning universe by teaching them the essence and the best state of the art in each discipline we teach. I'm particularly honored that here among us now is another full professor of ECPD, University for Peace, established by the United Nations, Professor Nicholas McLean. Great greetings. We are trying to teach the students the real economics, to teach them the essence, the original essence of the state of the art of each discipline. This also applies to diplomacy, its history, its economic dimensions, and other things that make the worldview that peace is possible and necessary, a necessary precondition for development. And let us face the facts that we are now living in a world which has a wider gap between the highly developed countries and those still developing ones. My own native country, Serbia, is definitely a case in point. We are in the middle of Europe, but we are still grappling to develop. And that's a long process, and education of human resources is at its center. There is no modern economy, there is no modern society, there is no welfare for individuals, for disprivileged groups, for people with special needs, etc., unless we produce this surplus and use it wisely. And the wisest use of it is education. So what we should do as ECPD is to extend this education availability to the bachelor's level, to the undergraduate level, because I don't know how many of you are aware of the fact that the United Nations educational, academic, and research system only starts with master's studies at postgraduate level and goes specialist studies, master's studies, doctoral studies, and postdoctoral studies. Well, that's fine, but it is not sufficient because including migration, shall I say, victims or migration actors, everybody needs an undergraduate education first at the tertiary level, which is what we spoke about in the earlier session.
Could I ask?
To go down this pyramid of education and extend it down to bachelor's level. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm taking too much.
No, Liliana, it's not that. I want you to answer the other two bits of the question, though. One is,
Yes. Well,
what would you advise all the people in this room to do? It's the individual action. And what would you do if you were Prime Minister?
Please ask me what I would do if I were Minister of Education, because there I have very, very specific plans. We really need to shift into a new pedagogical and didactic paradigm. Secondly, we need to do as individuals our best to encourage high quality education. In lines of what has been said this morning, we need to get every person to be an active consumer and actor of this educational process, which has an aim, because learner autonomy as a paradigm has been defined and specified by the Neo-Confucian philosopher Zhu Xi in the 12th century in China. The idea of a learner autonomy is that every learner is aware of why he is learning. Of course, this has been translated into modern English by Professor David Little of Trinity College Dublin and European Commission validator for higher education. Why he is learning, what are his aim in his own career and life in learning, and what quality of knowledge he wants to produce within himself. This alchemy of actually cogniting this process is very important. So each of us can become a good, conscious, quality, autonomous learner. That's what I think we should do, because if we study not for diploma papers, which can be issued and then nostrified and apostilled, and all these administrative components in our educational systems are blurring the essence. The essence is gaining real knowledge.
Okay, thank you.
As individuals, yes. As Prime Minister, I would give more than 7% of GDP as investment into education.
Into education. I think we heard that quite loud in that sense. Donald, you've got an election coming up soon.
Yes,
Yeah.
we do. I noticed.
But,
I'll get at this from a couple of different angles, and that is in terms of first what the individual can do. And I, again, being someone steeped in cultural theory and the studies I did in the 1980s and 90s, I often will go back to a theorist like Michel Foucault. And Foucault was very clear about the role of what he called the specific intellectual. And this is in one of his essays on ethics. And that is, each one of us sits in a position, in a space, where we're not prime minister, unless there is a prime minister in the room, but we do have ways of exercising power in the sphere around us. And to do that with a critical consciousness, with a sense of social commitment, with a sense of vision, with a responsiveness to students, for those of us, as almost all of us here are in education, I think is key. But what I want to temper that with, again, is what is possible and impossible, in my case, in a university setting. Again, we've seen, even outside this building, we've seen, individuals engaged in protest as they have every right to and should be in many ways applauded for. But we, meaning university professors or even provosts or even university presidents, we don't change national policy. And we certainly don't change policies of governments that are not even our own, but are, thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of miles away from us. And I think that is the danger, is for us to assume either one, that we, that by agitating or demonstrating or acting in a civilly sort of, kind of disobedient, even if, sort of, again, understandable way, that we're actually changing the world outside of our campuses, because we're not. What we can do, and this goes back to my first comment, is we have to make sure that when our students leave campus, that they are going to be engaged citizens, that they do go out and vote, that if they're demonstrating on campus, that I hope there's equal attention to demonstrating, let's say, at an embassy of a government whose policies they do not agree with. that might change something. What happens in a building on a campus is unlikely to change very much. So I would just say that, again, what we can do is bring to this an awareness of our own ability to change that is what is within our sphere, but let's not let's not exaggerate what that sphere is. Otherwise, I think we're deluding ourselves, and we're also probably not going to have any real impact on the larger world outside of campus.
And just out of interest, if you had to change kind of in the States, I guess it's slightly different. We have state policies too, but in terms of policy, in terms of educational policy, for example, is there anything you'd change?
Yes, and I actually think it's in line with some of what Liliana said. We've seen a terrible divestment from public education in the United States, and I'll talk about this a little bit in my talk tomorrow. But public universities, those that are supposed to be state-supported, have seen their budgets slashed by, multiples of 10%. So that for what used to be a public sort of good has now become very much a private, responsibility in terms of paying your own way at college or university. And I think that would be the thing I would change, is a reinvestment in public education. Because when we were talking earlier about access by refugees or the dispossessed to education, in the United States, there are no laws preventing undocumented students from attending universities. There are a few local states that may restrict it, but most states, you are not required to provide any proof of citizenship. But how do you pay for it is the problem. Because higher education now in the U.S. is so incredibly expensive that an undocumented young person probably cannot pay $20 or $30 and sometimes $60, $70, $80,000 a year for an education.
Thank you very much. I'm going to ask you, this is a bit more of a quick-fire question, but it's actually one that is also about grounding this in a reality, which actually says whether it's global citizenship or whether it's educating for peace. I have to write modules occasionally. You kind of think, okay, so what's Peace 101 look like? What do you teach? And what on earth do you ask students to read? And I'm really interested in that question at a grounded level. And I'm talking about undergraduate students here. I'm not talking about, somebody who's already got a kind of literature base. But I do wonder, they're such abstract concepts to so many people. Whether it's, you can choose the module, global citizenship, or you can choose education for peace. But I'd be really interested in the literature. Or, what the learning outcomes are. And I know I ground that in something very real, but I think that's what we all share, is a very real sense of, well, what is it we're teaching? Because the sentiments are so huge and right. To come back to Brendan's comment about, distinguishing the human wrong. But I think it's which I really enjoy, actually, as an idea. But what is it? What's the literature in your perfect module? Brendan.
Back to me again. It's okay. Well, at the level of undergraduate, or even at the level of just a capacity building workshop, which I have been involved in, peace workshops, I always start with conflict. We've got to move away from the war-peace dichotomy, because for many that's either too abstract or too intractable. It's very hard to grasp at a beginning level, that level of conflict. But we all experience conflict in our day-to-day lives. In fact, we can experience conflict without anyone else being around. I have an internal conflict that I want to lose weight, but I like to eat chocolate. So how do I reconcile these conflicting interests within myself? And so that would be my intro to Intro to Peace. That first of all, we have to acknowledge that there's always conflict everywhere. And the more people are involved from the broader backgrounds, the more conflict there will be. But conflict is not necessarily a bad thing. What's bad is when that conflict manifests itself in a violent way. And so from there, I would then build into different conceptualizations of violent conflict and how best to prevent or overcome these manifestations of violent conflict.
That's great, and you can always let the belt out by a little bit when you eat the chocolate. So it's kind of much the same, I guess. Liliana, what would your kind of Peace 101 look like? What would be the first learning?
Well, as I said, the quality and the level of teaching is important. And
I'm talking undergraduate. This is
Yes.
undergraduate
Yes.
101.
yeah, we are not teaching, unfortunately, undergraduates as yet, but I'm not going to give up on this struggle because we have to start with undergraduates.
And what would the learning be?
Well, we would start with microeconomics. As my highly esteemed colleague just mentioned, it's actually a matter of choice. We have to learn the concepts of marginal utility and also of scarceness and also of making choices, because it is up to us to choose the trade-off between chocolate and conflict in the right way in order to learn how to resolve it in advance. This is the famous Japanese principle of pokayoke. That means preventing something from happening. Prevention is the mother of all disciplines, and that comes from this trade-off principle, which is so basic to microeconomics. This is what I would include. So the works of John Maynard Keynes, absolutely. Then Michael Posner in international economics, basically James Mead, my professors from Cambridge. I would also include the works of a famous Japanese economist and at one point Minister of Foreign Affairs, who was the president of the ECPD International Council, Okita Saburo, then Ichimura Ichiro, and also some other classical works, which are not considered necessarily economics, but could come into the area of philosophy, like Aristotle's works, and also the evolutionary theories, starting with predecessors to Charles Darwin and Charles Darwin himself, because I think our education has to bring enlightenment to students.
That's a big module.
Yeah, well, it's
A really big module.
a lot of reading, because nothing, I don't believe in digest.
Yes, yeah. Me too. But it's a very big module. Donald.
I'll keep it rather more to a couple of texts. One is, obviously the most important thing, again, is for students to understand where power lies and how power is exercised. And again, I go back to my old friend Foucault, who will help tremendously with that. But then I would, being a literature professor, turn to something where we see how conflict and oppression is normalized. So I would look to, again, the old text of 1984 by George Orwell, which again, I think some people in my country right now is taking as an instruction manual on how maybe the US government and Putin's government and Xi's government should come to a mutual arrangement to just keep war going all the time at some point in the future so that the elites can, in fact, benefit from it.
Indeed. Well, it's interesting, though, because you might say, well, why would we teach anything else other than microeconomics, conflict, and power? And we teach those through many, many subjects, because the subject is often the carrier for many of those things in different ways. So I think there's a real interesting idea, if we are educating for peace or if we're educating for global citizenship, that actually, is there a curriculum that shouldn't include those three issues? And I'll leave that one hanging in the air, just to see if anybody wants to try and answer it. Okay. I'm going to give the panelists a bit of a rest. Well, I'm not. I'm going to throw the microphone out. Matthew's wielding a microphone there to anybody who wants to make a comment, but preferably to ask a question or posit a new question to the panel. So I don't see any hands yet. There's nobody. There is a hand. And please, I'm just going to remind everybody, these are questions to be debated, not lectures to be given. Okay, just saying.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm Ayub from Indonesia. My question is to Brendan, Professor Brendan, because I'm also a lecturer and teaching cosmopolitanism, one of the subjects that I'm teaching. But why I'm going to ask you this question, because I'm originally from Afghanistan, but I obtained my Indonesian citizenship last year. But if I was still Afghan, I would definitely not be present here because I cannot gain the UK visa, because as you know that, and you said before, one of the beautiful quote that the strong do what they want, the weak suffer what they must. And there is a quote also from Mata Nussbaum, if I don't pronounce it.
Could I ask you to ask the question?
Yeah, I'm asking because it's related to that. We live in a world of states in which being a citizen of the world with a relatively strong state, we are living in a disaster. So I have so many experience when I always apply for the visa as an Afghan, always rejected. So I'm going to ask you, is global citizenship is possible? Because of these many standards that we see, and especially the crisis that happen, migration and immigration, and coming from different countries, and most of them that comes from the war-torn countries, always rejected. Thank you.
Brendan. Yeah. And then there's a...
Okay, I think from a de jure international legalist position, global citizenship is only possible for those who are disenfranchised, who do not have other citizenship. And the UN is trying to work on issues like that in terms of giving a global recognition. What we've seen for the Rohingya that they've done themselves is employ blockchain technology as we use for cyber currencies to try to give recognition of another person, their identity. So I think what we should look at is move beyond the diplomacy of states and look at individually, can we recognize someone for what they want to be recognized as? So you'll still face the international problems of visas, but at the very least, I would hope that people would be able to recognize you as both Afghan and Indonesian, and anything else you want to identify as, and empower you in that position. So I think that's how we move away from this strong do what they want, weak suffer what they must, because even the weakest among us can give that degree of recognition, can empower others.
Thank you very much. I think we've got one question here and then another over here. So,
thank you very much.
I think so.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed very much the panelist and the coordinator, but I want to go more serious and more realistic. What we are talking about, education for peace. What is peace? You try to hide between your speeches somehow to escape from making peace. I mean, what we can do if you have hate to humanities, hating people, what you can do about killing children, students, destroying schools, universities, mosques, churches, hunger problems. What are you going to do to educate for peace? This is very important to raise the voice of the conference here as the participants, not only as individuals, because our individual voice is very weak.
Okay, thank you.
Let me finish, please.
Well,
let me finish. I didn't finish yet. This is number one. Number two, we are talking about democracy.
Sorry, I've got people waiting. I'm sorry, we've got an hour and I've got 10 minutes. So it's a very good question. It's a really important question. Is what does that mean? What does educating for peace mean? And I'd like the panel to answer it.
Thank you.
Shall I lead off again?
Do you want to lead off, or do you want?
Well, just in a few words, education for peace begins with our cognition that peace is conducive to development and not war. Basically, why I said John Maynard Keynes, because he solved the world macroeconomic issues in the 1920s. How did he solve them? By proving, not only theoretically, but also in practice, that any kind of investment creates demand. So if we do not produce guns and create demand that way, if we produce knowledgeable human resources, if we invest in education, we will also create demand. And instead of the policy, which was then known as the bugger die neighbor policy, that means stop imports from your neighboring country, that led to catastrophe worldwide. If you go to stimulate demand and market and actual exchange of goods and knowledge and people, then we are going to create the new consciousness that war is not needed.
Okay.
Because conflicts can be resolved in a peaceful way, and that will give us more benefit, more value added, more good goods.
Okay, so there's an economic answer to that.
Well,
Brendan, I'm sure your answer is a political.
Yes.
So specifically an answer to the question, first of all, peace is an essentially contested concept.
Yeah.
And it is not just the absence of war. So in the wider peace literature, there's very much an emphasis on positive peace rather than negative peace. So that's one way we go about it, is to unpack the other things that cause a deterioration of peaceful relations. Because the natural state of affairs is, in fact, peace, not war.
Yep.
Secondly, you said, well, what do you do when you've got hate and everything? Well, hate is socially constructed. We are not born into this world hating other people. It is socially constructed. It is the product of securitization, deflecting from our own shortcomings. So as it's socially constructed, we can socially deconstruct it.
Yes.
And that is the objective of peace education, to socially deconstruct hatred.
Thank you very much. Did you want to add anything, Donald?
Only that, again, and I will say that the concept of global citizenship is itself problematic, and we'll talk about that later, because what you're talking about is a lack of empathy and a lack of ability to see oneself and another. And that's not citizenship. That is actual coming together and finding commonality that I think is at the root of misunderstanding, whether you're talking about racial divides or, divides over sexual or gender identity or whatever. That is the basis of what we need to focus on, is how to talk about commonality rather than division, because it's that I think drives the bombs and the destruction, etc.
What unites us is greater than what divides us. Yeah. The gentleman in the blue shirt.
Thank you very much, Nicholas McLean. I wondered if the panel could say, first of all, if they feel that there are valuable lessons to be learned from the period between the two world wars. And on global citizenship, for instance, the invention of Nansen passports. There could be something that brings that up to date. And in terms of literature that's worth reading, I would strongly recommend what I was taught in international relations at Oxford, a variety of books by E.H. Carr, which highlight the problems of the theory and practice of international relations, how idealists tend to go to what was then the League, now the United Nations, and find people who agree with them, but don't have power. And you have the others who believe in realpolitik and keep their hands on the levers of power, usually to bad effect. Does the panel agree?
Brendan? you want to start?
Okay, short answer, no.
Good. So
The problem with E.H. Carr and other realists is it's essentially a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you say the strong do what they want, the weak suffer what they must, that means the strong will continue to do what they want and the weak will throw up their hands in horror, we can't do anything about it. Even if that's true, I'd rather not believe it's true, because then why are we even bothering? So I believe that our purpose is to investigate ways in which we can make a better world. Now, clearly there are shortcomings with the interwar period, the 20-year crisis, as E.H. Carr described it, but the shortcomings were not in the ideas of idealism, but rather in their implementation. The collective security, for instance, needed universalism, but half the great powers weren't even there. So you couldn't have a collective security mechanism when you don't have the great powers involved in it. So I think we need to move beyond this we can't do anything, this essentially conservative position that we can't make a better world. But also, we've got to be careful with the postmodernists, who also say something similar, going to the other extreme of the intellectual debate, that there are competing regimes of the truth, we can't choose one over another. Well, I choose to have a world without genocide than a world with genocide. I think that I can make that choice, that it is objectively as well as subjectively bad to have genocide. So that's why, again, I take this universal wrong perspective. And with the end of the Cold War, of course, old ideas and new again. We had the triumphalism of Francis Fukuyama. I think that's wrong also. So the idea that we are inevitably going to reach perpetual peace is just as wrong as the idea we can never get peace. That really there's something in between, which is it's going to be tough, but we have to look at avenues through which we can strive for peace.
I want to respond to that for a moment, because I disagree with you on the postmodernists, because actually coming out of the sort of imperatives of existentialism, what actually Foucault and others would say is it is imperative that you choose, that even if you cannot prove factually that one regime of truth is, quote unquote, better than another, you have the moral imperative to choose which one you align yourself with.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm conscious we've got a lot of people wanting to speak, and I think a lot of you are going to have to do this outside of this room. Lilia, and you've got a short answer, or do you want to leave that question and we'll take another question from the floor?
Comes into this idea of high quality education, because our students, our young generations, do not understand the interwar period, and this is where Professor McLean is absolutely right. This is why we are not aware of why things are repeating themselves and happening to us again. That's all I would say for now.
Okay, that's great. Now we've got a lady, we've got lots now. We had sorry, yeah, all right, we'll take one and then we'll take the lady in green, if that's okay. I know you want to speak and there's somebody at the back too, but we've got literally 5 minutes, so.
Hi, it's my name's Kelly Hickey. I'm from Dublin in Ireland, and hopefully this will be a short question along the talk of peace and hate and conflict. I think to me there's maybe a step before that, and as a friend of mine told me, the opposite of love is actually fear, not hate. And I think so much of what we see globally, locally, regionally, is based on a fear of each other, a fear of losing what we have, a fear of not getting what we deserve.
And the question?
And the question is, what methodologies or practices inside and outside of universities would you recommend to alleviate this fear?
Fear is the product of ignorance, of not knowing the other. So the important thing is to teach understanding of the other.
Education.
Yeah.
Education as always. But quality education, not just cramming
So
stuff.
we need to know what good looks like.
Yep.
That's the issue. There, okay. The lady in the green next. We've got...
Thank you. This is a very interesting discussion, and I can see different perspectives of pedagogists and economists, historians, and literature and interesting to see that there is no one size
And the question?
fits all. Question is, the words like educating for peace or global citizenship seems to be contentious, as we know. Would you consider changing the names? The interesting concept that you mentioned is critical consciousness, making your students more critically conscious. Would that be a better name for your course, or is it a better approach to teach about conflicts and our responsibility in our global context?
So are you suggesting that the learning outcome is critical consciousness?
I am just asking whether it would be
Okay.
the one of the learning outcomes or the learning outcome.
My short answer is yes. I think that actually captures what we're trying to do, that it actually, you look at the time-bound, culture-bound notions of what you accept as truth, and the ability to see that as something that is not eternal, it is not fixed, and it is not the inherent right of any one person to espouse, is actually what I would say is at the core of what we're trying to do.
Okay, we've got one more. I know you've been waiting to speak, so take it away.
Luan from Vietnam. I have a very short question. We are talking about curriculum. We are talking about talk about curriculum, about the content, but the primary outcome is the behavior of learner. Then how to ensure that we are teaching behavior and not knowledge?
Thank you.
I think one way we can do that is by teaching through practice. So I run conflict resolution workshops. I teach a course on comprehensive peace building, but also I go out into conflict-affected areas and bring people together to practice in conflict resolution workshops.
Yes, and also negotiation skills, lobbying, presenting one's aims, all sorts of skills that I didn't have the time to speak about, which come after this theoretical build-up and foundation.
So there's a skill set.
Yep.
There's economics, conflict, power. So we've got a curriculum here. And we've got some practices and some behaviors to tackle. So I think that there are some really interesting things about what our education is for, and perhaps we need to revisit some of that. Can I just thank everybody? First of all, I want to thank my esteemed panel. So please, audience, if you can give them a round of applause. For sharing their wisdom. And then I'd quite like to thank you and ask you to give yourselves a round of applause just for engaging. And on that note, it is time, and I have kept to time to the minute, so thank you all very much.
And I will say that this leads rather seamlessly into the interactive session we're about to start. So don't go away.
I would like to thank Professor Ann Boddington for this wonderful mediation.
Thank you.